The carriage door slammed open in the middle of the forest road, and a girl in a torn silver dress stood in the moonlight with her hand on the handle, breathing hard. The driver had stopped because she had run straight into the path of the horses, arms wide, eyes burning. Behind her, hounds were howling. Behind her, men and wolves were tearing through the trees. And somewhere far behind her, in a glittering ballroom she had just escaped, an alpha king was waiting to choose a Luna. She climbed in without waiting for permission. She slammed the door behind her. She sat down on the velvet seat across from a stranger she could not see clearly, because the curtain was drawn and the only light came from the small lantern swinging above their heads. And the first words out of her mouth, with her chest still heaving and her hair still tangled with leaves, were these: "Drive, now, or I swear by every moon that ever rose, I will jump out of this carriage and run, and when they catch me, I will tell them you helped me, and your night will end far worse than mine." There was a long silence. Then a low, amused voice from the shadows said, "Well, hello to you too." Her name was Selene. She was 17 years old. She was the only daughter of Alpha Ronin of the Crescent Pack, and she had been promised to a ball she never agreed to attend. To understand why she was running, you have to understand the night that came before this one. You have to understand the room she grew up in, the father she loved and feared, and the rumor that had been twisting through the kingdom for months. The rumor of an alpha king who had killed his own brother for the crown. The rumor of a man with eyes like cold iron who had refused to take a Luna for 7 years, and who, now, finally, had agreed to choose one. Every unmated daughter of every noble pack in the kingdom had been summoned. Every father with ambition had polished his daughter and sent her in. And every mother who had ever heard the stories had whispered the same thing into her child's ear before she left. "Smile, be quiet, do not look him in the eye, do not give him a reason." Selene's mother was dead. Her father gave her no such warning. Her father gave her instead a dress of liquid silver and a string of pearls heavier than any chain she had ever worn, and he said, "Stand up straight, he will choose you, he must." And when she asked him why, he did not answer. He just looked away. And she understood in that moment that this was not about her at all. It was about land. It was about pack alliances. It was about what her father owed and what her body was worth. If you like this story, or if this story stayed with you even a little, take a second to like, subscribe. 2 hours before she ended up in that carriage, Selene was standing in the great hall of the Crescent estate, in front of a mirror taller than she was, while 3 women braided silver thread into her hair. The dress was beautiful. She hated it. The pearls were heavy. She hated them. The shoes were too tight. She hated them more. She had spent her whole life climbing trees in this house, and shooting arrows in the courtyard with her father's guards, and reading books late at night in her father's library, and now she was being polished for a king like a sword for the wall. Her father came in. He did not knock. He never knocked. He stood behind her in the mirror, and his hand came down on her shoulder, and he said, very softly, the way he only spoke when he was about to make her do something she did not want to do, "You will be perfect tonight. Do you understand me?" She met his eyes in the glass. "And if he doesn't choose me?" Her father's hand tightened. "He will. And if I don't want him to?" The hand tightened more. "That is not a question I will answer." That was when she knew. Not just that she was going to the ball, but that her father had already promised her there. He had made some agreement, some quiet bargain in some quiet room, and her body was the coin. She did not cry. She had not cried in front of her father since she was 9 years old. She just nodded once, very slowly, and said, "Yes, father." And she meant something different by it than he thought. She had loved her father once. That was the part nobody talked about. The part that made all of this so much worse. When she was small, before her mother died, her father had been a different man. He had carried her on his shoulders through the orchard. He had taught her to whistle. He had told her, on the night she turned 6, that her name was Selene because the moon had looked into the room when she was born and refused to leave. She had believed him. She had loved him so much in those years that she had thought her chest would crack open with it. Then her mother died, and a year passed, and another, and a third, and the man who had carried her on his shoulders stopped being able to look at her face. He said it was because she had her mother's eyes. He said it like an accusation. By the time she was 12, he had stopped speaking to her except about lessons and lineages and what she was worth. By the time she was 15, she had understood that she was no longer his child. She was an asset. She was the last thing of value in a house that had been quietly bleeding silver for years, and she was being saved up for something. Tonight, finally, she had learned what. She thought sometimes about the man her father had been. She thought about him on long nights when sleep would not come. She thought about the small girl on the small shoulders, whistling in the small orchard. She did not know whether she missed him because he had been her father, or because he was the last proof she had ever had that someone in this world had looked at her and seen only her, only Selene, and not a path to land or coin or alliance. She suspected the second. She suspected the second, and that was the wound. And the wound was the reason she was about to do what she was about to do. The carriage to the palace was long and silent and dark. She sat across from her father and watched the trees go by, and she thought about every escape route she had ever mapped in her head. She had been mapping them since she was 12. Every girl in this kingdom mapped them. They never said it out loud, but they all did it. The window, the kitchen door, the stable, the river, the road north. The road north was the only one that mattered tonight, because the road north led out of the kingdom into the free territories where no alpha king could touch her and no father could drag her back. The palace, when they arrived, was a thing out of a dream. Towers of pale stone, windows lit with gold, music spilling out of every door, 1,000 candles and 1,000 chandeliers, and underneath them, daughter after daughter after daughter, each one in a dress that cost more than a village. Selene walked in on her father's arm, and every head turned, and she felt her stomach turn with them. Because she was beautiful. She knew she was beautiful. She had been told it her whole life, like it was a weapon someone else owned. And tonight, in that dress, with that hair, she was going to be chosen. She could feel it. She could feel the whole room arranging itself around the certainty of it. She did not see the king. He had not come down yet. He was somewhere upstairs behind a door, waiting to enter. The whole ball was arranged so that he would walk down the great staircase and look at all of them at once and pick. Like fruit, like horses, like a sword off a wall. The girls were arranged in a half circle in front of the staircase. The fathers stood behind them. Selene's father pushed her gently into her place and stepped back, and she stood there, in her silver dress, with her heart pounding, and she looked up at the empty staircase and she thought, no. Just that. No. She turned her head slightly. To her left, 3 girls down, was a side door, a servant's door, half hidden behind a tapestry. She had seen a maid go through it earlier carrying a tray. She knew, without having to think about it, that it led to the kitchens, and the kitchens led to the stables, and the stables led to the road, and the road led north. She had perhaps 2 minutes before the king came down, perhaps less. Every guard in the room was looking up at the staircase, waiting for him. No one was looking at her. She moved. She did not run. Running would have ended it. She walked, slowly, the way a girl walks who has been told she is allowed anywhere in this palace tonight, the way a girl walks who has every right. She walked sideways, then behind a column, then along the wall, and she lifted the tapestry, and she slipped through the door, and the moment the door closed behind her, she ran. She ran down a corridor lined with copper pots. She ran through a kitchen full of startled cooks who opened their mouths to shout and then saw her dress and her face and closed their mouths again, because this was a ball night, and on a ball night a noble girl could be anywhere and they were not paid to ask. She ran out the back door, into the cold night, and she did not stop running. Her shoes broke off her feet within the first 100 yards. She left them in the gravel. Her dress tore on a low branch as she went over the garden wall. She left half the silver thread of it hanging there like a flag. By the time she reached the trees, she was barefoot, and her hair had come loose from its braids, and she was laughing. Laughing. Because she had done it. Because for the first time in her life, no one knew where she was. Not her father, not her guards, not her king. No one in the world knew where Selene of the Crescent Pack was, and the not knowing was the most beautiful thing she had ever felt. The forest was the king's hunting ground, but she was an alpha's daughter. and she could read trees the way other people read books. She found the road within 20 minutes. She walked along the edge of it, in the shadow of the brush, ready to drop down at the first sound of hooves. And then, behind her, she heard the horns. Far away, at first. Then closer, hunting horns, search horns. They had noticed she was gone. Of course they had. They had been about to put a crown on her head, and the crown had walked out of the room. She started to run again. The horns came closer. Then dogs. Then the soft thunder she had hoped never to hear. The sound of mounted wolves in pursuit, claws and hooves and breath, and the low howl that says, "We have your scent." She ran harder. Her feet bled. She did not feel them. The road curved, and she heard a different sound up ahead. Wheels. A carriage moving slowly, not in a hurry, not running from anything. A carriage with a driver in dark livery and 2 black horses with their breath pluming in the cold. She did not think. She stepped out into the road, in front of the horses, with her arms wide, and the driver hauled on the reins so hard that the carriage skidded sideways and stopped within an arm's length of her. The driver started to shout. She did not hear what he said. She walked past him to the door of the carriage, and she hauled it open, and she climbed inside, and she slammed it shut behind her, and she said the words that would, in a few minutes, end her life as she knew it. "Drive, now, or I swear by every moon that ever rose, I will jump out of this carriage and run, and when they catch me, I will tell them you helped me, and your night will end far worse than mine." And the man across from her, sitting in the shadow, said, "Well, hello to you too." She could not see his face. She could see the line of a jaw, the gleam of an eye, the long shape of a body in dark clothes. She could smell him, faintly, leather and cold air, and something underneath, something deep and warm and animal that her own wolf, even buried as it was, even silenced as it was, sat up inside her chest and noticed. She ignored that. She had no time for that. "Are you going to drive or not?" she snapped. There was a pause. Then he leaned forward, just a little, just enough that the lantern light caught one side of his face. He was, she registered distantly, around her age, perhaps a little older, perhaps 25. He had a dark, severe sort of face, the kind of face that did not smile easily, and he was not smiling now. But there was something in his eyes that was close to amusement. He said, "And who exactly am I driving away from?" "None of your concern." "It is rather my concern. They appear to be hunting wolves." The horns sounded, much closer this time. The carriage shook slightly, the horses fretting. He turned his head toward the window without taking his eyes off her, and he tapped, twice, on the panel behind him. The carriage lurched forward. The driver had decided. They were moving. Selene let out a breath she had not known she was holding. She sank back against the velvet seat. She closed her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The carriage rolled. The horns faded. She could hear her own heartbeat slow. Then the man across from her said, mildly, "You're bleeding on my upholstery." She opened her eyes. She looked down. There was a long red line down her shin, from where the wall had caught her. There was blood on the velvet. She said without meaning to, "I'll have it cleaned." He laughed. It was a short laugh, almost surprised, as if he had not expected to laugh tonight. He said, "Will you now?" "Yes, I'm rich." "Are you?" "Very." He leaned back into the shadow again. She could not see his face anymore. He said, "So, a rich girl, in a torn ball gown, running through the king's forest at midnight, with the royal hunt behind her. Should I assume you are running from a husband, or to one?" Something about the way he said it pricked her, some lazy, knowing edge. She was tired and frightened, and her feet hurt, and the question landed wrong. She said before she could stop herself, "I am running from the worst man in the kingdom." And which one is that?" "The Alpha King." There was a small, careful silence. The carriage rolled on. Outside, an owl called once. Inside, the lantern swung. The man in the shadows said very calmly, "The Alpha King. Yes, and what has he done to you?" "Nothing yet. That is rather the problem." "Ah." She could not see his face, but she could feel the attention of him now. the way you can feel a wolf in the dark even when it is not moving. She felt, for the first time, a small thread of unease. She pushed it down. She was too angry to be afraid. She had been afraid all night. Now she was something else. She said, "Have you ever met him? Once or twice?" "Then you know." "Know what?" "What he is, what they say about him. He killed his own brother for the throne. He has not taken a Luna for 7 years because no woman with a soul will go near him. He summons every unmated girl in the kingdom like cattle to a market and picks one. He doesn't even pretend it is a courtship. It is a purchase. He is arrogant, and he is cruel, and he is the kind of man who thinks a crown is the same as consent." She was speaking faster now, and louder, the words coming up out of a place she had been keeping them all night. "And my father sent me there tonight to be chosen. He arranged it. He sold me to that man's bed, and I was meant to stand in a line and smile while he walked down a staircase and pointed. And so you ran." "And so I ran." The carriage rolled. The man across from her said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, very softly, "What is your name?" "Selene, of the Crescent Pack." "Selene of the Crescent Pack." He said it as if he were tasting it. Then he said, "Tell me, if you had stood in that line, if he had walked down that staircase, if he had pointed at you, what would you have done?" She turned her face toward the window. The trees were going past in a black blur. She said, "I would have spat in his face." The man laughed again, longer this time. Lower. He said, "Selene of the Crescent Pack, I think we are going to be friends." "I doubt it." "Why?" "Because as soon as we reach a town, you are letting me out, and you are forgetting you ever saw me." About that. Something in his voice changed. Something small, something polite. It was the voice of a man who has been letting a conversation happen for his own amusement and is now ready, gently, to bring it back to ground. He said, "I am not, in fact, going to a town tonight. I am going home, and we are nearly there." "Where is home?" "Somewhere you will recognize." The carriage began to slow. Outside the window, the trees were thinning. Lights were rising up through them, many lights, tall lights, the lights of towers, the lights of a palace. Selene sat very still. The carriage made a slow turn. Hooves rang on stone. They were on a paved road now. They were passing under an arch. They were passing guards, many guards. Guards who bowed as the carriage went by, who stepped back, who saluted. Selene's mouth went dry. The carriage stopped. She heard the driver climb down. She heard footsteps approaching. She heard the door handle turn. The door opened. Cold night air rushed in. Beyond the door stood 2 soldiers in black and silver, the colors of the royal house, and beyond them stood the wide, bright, terrible courtyard of the king's own palace, the same palace she had run from less than 2 hours ago. The man across from her stood up. He had to duck his head to do it, because the carriage was not built for a man his size. He stepped past her, and as he stepped past her, the lantern light fell full on his face for the first time, and she saw him. Dark hair, a jaw like cut stone, a long, severe mouth, and eyes the color of cold iron. The soldiers in the courtyard dropped to one knee. "My king," they said, both of them, at once. Selene did not move. She did not breathe. She sat in that carriage in her torn silver dress with blood on her shin and leaves in her hair, and she stared up at the man she had spent the last 20 minutes calling arrogant and cruel and the worst man in the kingdom. He stood in the open doorway of the carriage with the cold light of his own palace behind him, and he looked down at her, and his face was very calm and very still and very tired. He said, quietly, only to her, "My name is Kaylin, and I think we should continue this conversation inside." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He held out his hand. She did not take it. She climbed out of the carriage on her own, barefoot, on the freezing stone of his courtyard. And she stood up to her full height, and she looked at him, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything. The soldiers stayed on their knees. The horses breathed white into the air. Somewhere far off, the hunting horns were still calling, They had been calling for her all this time, and they had been calling her home. Selene said very quietly, "I want to leave." Kaylin said very quietly, "I know." "Then let me." "I cannot." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at her bare feet, and the blood on her shin, and the leaves in her hair, and the way her hands were shaking even though her face was not. He said, "Because tomorrow morning, every alpha in this kingdom will know that the king's chosen Luna ran from his ball and was found in his carriage at midnight. They will not know that I did not choose you. They will only know that you were here. If I send you out tonight, you will not survive the road. Your father has already lost you once. He cannot afford to lose you twice. He will kill you before he lets you shame him." He paused. He said, "I will not let that happen. You don't know me." "No," he said, "but I know him." And she understood in that moment several things at once. She understood that this was not over. She understood that the man in front of her was not what the rumors said. She understood that he was, in fact, more dangerous than the rumors said, because he was clever and quiet, and he did not raise his voice. And she understood, with a sinking that went all the way to her bones, that she had escaped one cage tonight only to walk straight into another, and this one did not even have bars she could see. He said gently, "Come inside. You are bleeding. There is a room, there is food, there is a door. The door is not locked. You may walk out of it whenever you choose, but I am asking you, please, not to choose tonight, not until we have spoken." The word please did something to her. She had not expected the word please. She had been preparing for many words. Please was not one of them. She walked past him, into the palace with her chin up. The room they gave her was larger than her father's hall. The bed had 4 posts of carved black wood. The fire was already lit. There was a tray of food on a small table by the window, hot, fresh, as if someone had known she was coming. There was a copper bath behind a screen, full of steaming water. There was a clean dress folded on a chair, soft gray wool, simple, no silver, no pearls, just a dress a girl could move in. She stood in the middle of the room, in her ruined silver, and she stared at the dress, and she understood that he had thought of all of this in the time it took the carriage to drive from the road to the gate. He had given the orders without saying anything. He had decided somewhere on that road that she was staying. He had decided before she had. A maid came in, a small, quiet woman with kind eyes. She said, "My lady, the king has asked that you be made comfortable. He will not disturb you tonight. He says you may join him for breakfast in the morning, or not, as you prefer." Then she curtsied, and she helped Selene out of the silver dress, and she helped her into the bath, and she did not ask a single question. Not about the blood, not about the hair, not about the leaves. Selene had never been in the presence of someone so deliberately incurious in her life. It was, she realized, a kindness. He had told them not to ask. When the maid was gone, Selene lay in the bath until the water turned cool, and then she got out, and she put on the soft gray dress, and she ate a small piece of bread from the tray, and she sat on the floor in front of the fire, and she did not cry. She thought about crying. She did not cry. She thought about her father, who had sold her. She thought about the man in the carriage who had laughed when she insulted him to his own face. She thought about the door of this room, which was not locked. She got up. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the handle. She turned it. It opened. She closed it again. He had told the truth. The door was not locked. She could walk out, right now in the soft gray dress, in the middle of the night, into a palace full of soldiers who had just bowed to him, and she could try to find her way out of it, and she would not get past the 3rd corridor. He had not locked her in because he did not need to. The whole palace was the lock. She went to bed. She did not sleep. Morning came pale through the window. She heard birds. She heard, distantly, the sound of training in a courtyard, the ring of swords. She heard horses. She heard a kingdom waking up, and she lay in the strange bed and she thought about what to do next. She had 2 choices. She could refuse to leave the room and hope he gave up. Or she could go down and meet him and find out exactly what kind of cage she was in. She got up. She went down. A guard at her door bowed and led her, without a word, through corridors lined with portraits of dead kings and silent suits of armor and tall windows full of cold morning light. They went down a staircase. They went through an arch. They came to a door. The guard opened it. Beyond it was a small room, not a great hall, just a small breakfast room with a round table and 2 chairs and a window full of garden. And at the table sat Kalen, the Alpha King, in a plain black shirt, with his sleeves rolled up to the elbow, drinking tea. He looked, in the morning light, even more tired than he had at night. He stood up when she came in. "Selene, my king!" Something flickered in his face. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. He sat. There was tea, there was bread, there was honey, there was fruit. There was a small, quiet servant who poured and disappeared. There was no one else in the room. The door was not closed. Anyone could walk past. He had thought of that too. He was, she was beginning to understand, a man who thought of everything. He said, "How did you sleep?" "I didn't." "Ah." He picked up his tea. He looked at her over the rim. He said, "I owe you an apology." That surprised her. She had expected many things from him this morning. Apology was not on the list. She said, "For what?" "For not telling you, in the carriage, who I was." "You let me insult you to your face." "I did." "Why?" He set the cup down. He said, "Because no one has spoken to me honestly in 7 years. I was curious." "Curious?" "Yes. That is a very expensive curiosity, my king. For me." He inclined his head. He did not deny it. He said, "That is true, and so I will be honest with you now in return. May I?" She nodded, once. He said, "I did not choose you last night. I had not chosen anyone last night. I had not even come downstairs. I was in my carriage because I was leaving. I was going to ride out for a few hours to think and to come back and to choose the girl whose father had paid the highest price, because that is what this kingdom requires me to do. I did not want to do it. I have not wanted to do it for 7 years. But the law is clear. An Alpha King without a Luna is a king without an heir. A king without an heir is a war. I have already had one war. I cannot afford another." He paused. He said, "Then you climbed into my carriage, and you told me in detail what kind of man you thought I was, and it was not, by the way, an inaccurate description. I am in fact often arrogant. I am occasionally cruel. The crown does that, but I did not kill my brother." Her head came up. "My brother died in a duel he challenged me to. I did not want to fight him. He was drunk and he was angry, and he believed our father had favored me, which to be fair was true. He came at me with a silver blade. I disarmed him 3 times. He kept coming. The 4th time, he fell on his own knife. I held him while he died. He told me he was sorry. I told him I was sorry. The court declared me king by morning, because there was no one else. I have not been able to sleep in a dark room since." He picked up the tea again. His hand, she noticed, was perfectly steady. "I tell you this because you are the first person who has ever said it to my face that I killed him, and because I do not want you to be afraid of me for the wrong reason." She did not know what to say. She said, "There is a right reason?" "Several." He smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen from him. It was small and crooked and tired, and she did not, for a dangerous moment, dislike it. He said, "I am, for example, going to keep you here until I can think of a way to send you home that does not get you killed. That is, I think, a very good reason to be afraid of me." "You said the door was not locked." "It is not locked. Then I can leave." "You can. But I have sent a rider to your father this morning telling him that you are my guest, that I asked you here privately to discuss an alliance, that I will return you when our discussions are concluded. As far as the kingdom now knows, you have not run from anything. You have been invited. Your father will not kill you because he believes you are about to become Luna. The rumor of your shame is now the rumor of your honor. But that rumor only holds while you are here. The moment you leave this palace before I send you, your father will know, and he will act." She stared at him. He said very gently, "I have bought you time. That is all. You are not my prisoner. You are my guest. The door is not locked, the horse is in the stable, the road is open. But I am asking you, as the man who has just lied to your father to keep you alive, to stay long enough for us to think of a better ending than the one you were running toward." Selene was silent for a long time. She looked out the window. There was a garden out there, with white roses and a stone bench and a small fountain. There was a wall around the garden. The wall was not high. She could climb it. She knew without trying that she could, and she knew also that he knew it. She said, "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "This. Any of this. You could have driven past me on the road. You could have handed me to the soldiers at the gate. You could have locked the door. You could have made me your Luna last night with a single word, and no one in this kingdom would have stopped you. Why are you doing this instead?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because in 7 years of being king, you are the first person who has ever looked at me and seen a man before they saw the crown. Even if what you saw was the worst possible version of him, you saw him. And I have been very, very lonely, Selene of the Crescent Pack, and I would like, just for a few days, to talk to someone who is not afraid of me." She did not answer. She could not. There was something in her chest that did not know what to do with that sentence. She picked up her tea. Her hand was not steady. She set the tea down again. He said, "Eat something, please. You ran a long way last night." She ate. That was the first morning. There were many more. The days that followed had a strange shape. She did not see him often. He was a king, and a king, it turned out, worked. He was in council from the morning bell until the noon bell. He was in the training yard from the noon bell until the afternoon bell. He was in audiences from the afternoon bell until the evening bell. Selene was given the run of the palace and the grounds inside the wall. She was given a maid. She was given a horse, if she wanted one, on the condition that she rode only inside the inner park. She was given books. The library was vast. She had never seen so many books in one room. She read in the mornings. She walked in the afternoons. She watched, sometimes from a high window, as he trained in the yard below, stripped to the waist, blade in hand, moving against 3 men at once and disarming all of them in under a minute. He was not, she discovered, only clever. He was also very, very dangerous. It made the gentleness of him more frightening, not less. The cage had, she discovered, a shape. The shape was not bars. The shape was kindness. Every door she tried opened. Every question she asked was answered. Every meal she did not finish was taken away without comment. And every meal she did finish was followed, the next day, by something just a little better, as if someone, somewhere, had been making a list. She tested the cage in small ways in those first days. She asked for ink and paper, and they were brought. She asked for a map of the kingdom, and it was brought. She asked for a sword, and there was a small pause, and then a guard brought her one, a real one, not a practice blade, with a note in the king's own hand that said only, "You must promise to teach me what you intend to do with it." She had not asked for a sword again. She had kept the one they sent. She slept with it under her pillow for the first 3 nights, not because she was afraid of him, but because she had never owned a thing she had asked for and been given without an argument, and she did not entirely trust that it would not be taken away. On the 3rd afternoon she went to the stables, because she had not seen them yet, and she wanted to see how a king kept his horses. The stable master, a small gray man with one eye, did not at first know who she was. He set her to brushing a chestnut mare, the way he would have set any visiting noble to a small useful task, and she did it, in her gray wool dress, with her hair tied back, and they did not speak for an hour. At the end of the hour, he said, without looking at her, "You're the one from the carriage." She said, "Yes." He said, "He's been quieter since you came." She said, "Has he?" He said, That was all. He did not say it kindly, and he did not say it unkindly. He said it like a man reporting weather. She thought about it for the rest of the day. On the 4th day, she went to the training yard very early, before the rest of the palace was up. She wanted, she told herself, to see the place when it was empty. She did not, she told herself, want to see him. She was lying to herself, and she knew it, and she went anyway. He was already there. Of course he was already there. He was alone, with a wooden practice blade, running drills against a tall straw man. He had not seen her yet. She watched him from the shadow of an archway for a long time. He moved the way water moves. There was no waste in him. Each strike landed where the last had ended. She had been taught to fight by her father's guards since she was 9, and she could see in the way he moved that he had been taught the same way, and longer, and harder, and by men who had not loved him. She watched him, and she thought, I am looking at a person who has been alone since he was a child. She thought, I am looking at a person who has been preparing his whole life for someone to try to kill him in his sleep. She thought, that is not a man. That is a wound that learned to stand up. He saw her then. He stopped. He turned with the wooden blade still in his hand, and he saw her in the archway, and his face did the thing it always did when he saw her, the very small thing she had been learning to read. The smallest opening, as if he had been holding his face still all morning, and now for 1 second he did not have to. Then it closed again. He inclined his head. He said, My lady, you are up early. She said, I could not sleep. He said, Would you like a blade? She said, Not today. He said, Tomorrow then. She said, Perhaps. She turned to go. He said behind her very quietly, Selene. She stopped. She did not turn around. He said, Thank you for coming down. She walked away with that sentence inside her chest like a small live thing, and she did not for the rest of the morning know what to do with it. He came to her every evening for an hour, always the same. Always the small breakfast room, now lit with candles. Always with tea or wine, or sometimes nothing at all. Always with the door open. Always with the same first question, How are you today? And she would answer honestly because she did not know how to lie to him, and he would listen. And then they would talk. They talked about the kingdom. They talked about her pack and his court and the war he had fought and the peace he had made. They talked about her mother, who had died of a fever when Selene was 11. They talked about his mother, who had died in childbirth with him, and whose portrait still hung in the hallway outside his bedroom because, he said, he liked to say good night to her even though he could not remember her face. They talked about books. He had read everything she had read. He had read more. They talked about horses. They talked about the weather. They talked sometimes about nothing at all, just sat in the candlelight while the fire burned down, and neither of them spoke, and neither of them needed to. One evening she asked him about the war. She had not meant to. It had come out. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he set down his cup, and he told her. He told her about the year he had been 21, and the southern packs had risen, and he had ridden out at the head of an army in the spring, and not come home until the autumn. He told her about a battle at a place called 3 Rivers, where he had lost 200 men in a single afternoon because a scout had given him bad information, and he had believed it. He told her about a village he had ridden into the day after, looking for the scout, and finding instead an old woman who had recognized his banner and walked out to meet him with her hands open. He told her how she had said to him, You are very young to be a king. He told her how he had said back, I know. He told her how she had nodded and gone inside and brought him out a piece of bread and said, Eat that, child, and then go and finish the war, because there are children who need it finished. He told her he had eaten the bread. He told her he still sometimes dreamed about the bread. He had never, he said, eaten anything that tasted so much like being forgiven for something he had not yet been able to forgive himself for. She did not answer for a long time. Then she said, Did you find the scout? He said, Yes. She said, What did you do? He said, I let him go. She said, Why? He said, Because I was 21, and I had just lost 200 men, and I knew even then that if I started killing men for being wrong, I was going to be a king who killed a great many men. I decided I would rather be a king who lost a war than a king who killed for being lied to. We did not, in the end, lose the war. She said very quietly, You are not what they say you are. He said, I know. She said, Why do you not tell anyone? He said, Because the kingdom is more frightened of the man they think I am than they would ever be of the man I am. And a frightened kingdom does not start a second war. So I let them tell their stories, and I sleep alone, and I keep the peace. It is, I have come to think, a fair trade. She said, It is not a fair trade. He smiled a little. He said, "No, it is not." During one of their nightly conversations, she said, "Why have you not asked me to stay?" He looked at her over the rim of his cup. He said, "Because if I asked you, you would say no. And if you did not ask, then perhaps one day you would offer." She did not sleep that night either, but for a different reason. The breaking came the next day. It came, as breakings always come, out of a small thing. She had asked, in the morning, to ride beyond the inner park. She had asked the captain of the guard. The captain of the guard had said, very politely, that he would have to put the question to the king. She had said, very politely, that she would prefer not to bother him. The captain had bowed, very politely, and said that nevertheless. She had walked away from the conversation with her teeth set. That afternoon she found him in the long gallery, alone, looking at a map laid out on a table. He turned when she came in. He started to smile. He saw her face. He stopped smiling. She said, "I want to ride beyond the wall. Now? Today, tomorrow, whenever I please. I want to ride beyond the wall, and I want to do it without sending a question up through 3 men first. Selene, do not Selene me. I am asking you a simple question. May I leave the inner park?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, "If you ride beyond the wall, you will be seen. You will be seen by people who answer to your father. The story I have told the kingdom is that you are here as a guest. A guest does not ride out alone. A guest rides with the king, or she rides with an honor guard, or she does not ride. If you ride alone, the story breaks. If the story breaks, your father acts. We have discussed this. We have discussed many things. We have not discussed the fact that there is no door in this palace that opens for me without your name attached to it. That is not true. It is true. The library opens because you have permitted it. The horse opens because you have permitted it. The sword opens because you have permitted it. Even the silence opens because you have permitted it. I move through this house like a coin through a counting hand, and every door I pass through, someone, somewhere, makes a small mark in a small book that says, "The lady has gone here, the lady has gone there." I am not a prisoner. I have not said I am a prisoner. But I am not free either, and I would rather you said it out loud than kept pretending that an unlocked door is the same as an open one. His face had gone very still. He said, "What would you have me do? Tell me the truth about why I am still here. I have told you the truth. You have told me a truth. You have told me the truth that protects me. I am asking for the other one." There is no other one. There is. You said it on the night I came. You said you had been very lonely. You said you wanted to talk to someone who was not afraid of you. That is not a reason to keep a girl. That is a reason to visit a tavern. Why am I still here, Kaylin? The use of his name landed between them like a struck bell. He went very white around the mouth. He said, "Do not. Do not what? Do not push me to say something I cannot take back. Then say it. I am tired of being kept by a man who will not name the keeping. You are not being kept. Then open the gate. The gate is open. The gate has been open since the night you came. You know that. You know it because you tested the door of your room on the first night and found it unlocked. You know it because you walked the wall on the 3rd afternoon and counted the guards. You know it because you have, for 6 days, been measuring this house like a thing you might one day need to escape. And I have for 6 days let you measure it, because if you decided to leave, I wanted you to know exactly which way to go. Do not stand in front of me and tell me you are a prisoner. You are the freest person in this palace. The only one in chains is me." The room rang with it. He had not raised his voice. He had not exactly even hardened it. He had only stopped softening it, and the absence of the softness was worse than any shout. She felt the words go through her. She felt them land. She said, "What do you mean?" He turned away from her. He put both hands on the map table. He stood like that for a long moment, with his head down, breathing. When he spoke to the map. "I mean that I have not slept properly in 6 nights, because I have been listening every night for the sound of a horse leaving. I mean that I have postponed 3 meetings of the council so that I could sit in a small room with you and ask you about a book. I mean that I have sent letters to your father in your defense that I have not yet told you about, because the things he has said about you in his letters to me would, if you read them, make you take a horse and ride before morning, and I am not yet ready for you to ride. I mean that the man you mocked in a carriage has spent 6 days organizing a kingdom around the comfort of a girl who would, if she could, walk out of his life by the back gate before sunset. That is the keeping. There is no other. The keeping is mine. It is on me. You owe me nothing for it. You have not asked for any of it. I have done it because I cannot, it turns out, do otherwise. So yes. The gate is open. Take it. Take it today. Take a horse. Take a guard. Take the road. I will not stop you. I have never been able to stop you. The whole reason I am the man you have been looking at for 6 days is that I have been deciding every hour not to stop you. Do not stand in my long gallery and ask me to admit I have caged you. I have not caged you. I have caged myself. Around you, like a fool. He stopped. He did not turn around. His shoulders were rising and falling. Selene did not move for a long time. Then she walked very slowly around the table. She came to stand on the other side of it, opposite him, with the map between them. She put her hands flat on the map. She said, "Look at me." He looked at her. His eyes were not dry. She had never, in all her 17 years, seen a man's eyes look the way his looked then. Not her father. Not the boys in the courtyard. Not the men in the inns on the road. She had grown up among alphas, and alphas did not, as a rule, weep, and the men of her acquaintance had been very careful, all her life, never to look at her the way he was looking at her now. Like a man who has just confessed to a crime and is waiting to be sentenced. She said, very softly, "I did not know. You should not have had to know. I should not have said it." "Why not?" "Because I have just told you that you have me. And there is nothing more dangerous for a girl in your position than a king who has just told her he is hers. The next thing such a king will do, no matter how good he believes himself to be, is begin to find reasons that you owe him. You will not. I might. You will not. I have watched you for 6 days. I have watched you closely. I have watched you the way one watches a man one is preparing possibly to fight. You will not." He laughed. It was a soft, broken, tired laugh. He said, "And what exactly have you concluded in your watching? That you are a man who has been alone since he was a child. That you have been your whole life the kind of careful that costs everything. That you do not, in fact, know how to ask for the things you want, because no one has ever given you anything you did not first earn at the point of a sword. And that the reason you have not asked me to stay is not that you do not want me to. It is that you do not believe a person can be kept by being asked. You believe a person can only be kept by being trapped. And you have decided, somewhere deep down, that you would rather lose me than become the trap." She paused. She said, "Am I close?" He was very quiet. Then he said, "You are exact." "Then hear me. I will not be trapped. I will not be kept. I will not be held. But I am also not finished here. I do not know yet what I am. I do not know yet what I want. I came into your carriage running from one cage, and I will not, I promise you, walk out of this palace into another one. Not even a soft one. Not even a kind one. Not even one made entirely of your good intentions. But I am not running tonight. I will not run tomorrow. I will tell you when I run. I will not vanish in the dark. That is what I can give you. Will it do?" He said, "It will do." "Good. Selene." "Yes. Thank you." She nodded once. She turned. She walked out of the long gallery with her chin up and her hands shaking, and she went to her room, and she shut the door, and she sat on the floor with her back against it, and for the first time in years, she cried. Not for him, not for herself. For both of them, and for the wound that had stood up and learned to be a king, and for the girl who had run into his carriage and found, instead of a monster, a man who had been waiting his whole life for someone to ask him a real question. She cried until she was empty. Then she got up. She washed her face, she dressed for dinner, she went down. He was waiting in the small breakfast room, exactly as he always was, with the door open and the candles lit and the tea already poured. He looked up when she came in. Neither of them said anything about the morning. They did not need to. The morning had said itself. On the 7th day a letter came from her father. It was not delivered to her. It was delivered to the king, and the king brought it to her in person, in the garden with the white roses, where she had taken to sitting in the afternoons. He held it out without opening it. He said, "It is yours." And he turned to leave, to give her privacy, and she said, "Stay." And he stayed. She read the letter. She read it twice. Her hands, by the second reading, were shaking. She handed it to him. He read it. His face did not change, but a small muscle along his jaw moved. The letter said this: "My daughter, I am told you are the king's guest. I am told he intends to make you his Luna. I am told you are well treated. I am very pleased. You will remember, I trust, what is owed to your pack and to your father. You will remember that an alpha's daughter does not embarrass her alpha. You will remember that I have arrangements that depend on this match. You will remember that there are debts I cannot pay if you fail. You will be perfect. You will not run. You will not, under any circumstance, return to this estate without a crown on your head. If you do, you will not be welcomed. You will not be sheltered. I have one daughter. I have one chance. Do not waste it. Your loving father." Selene sat for a long time, with the letter in her lap, and the white roses around her, and the king beside her on the stone bench, and she did not say anything. She did not cry. She had stopped being able to cry sometime around the third reading. Finally she said, "I have nowhere to go." Kaylin said, "You have here. Here is your house. It can be yours." She turned her head. She looked at him. He was looking at her very steadily with those iron-cold eyes that she had begun, somewhere along the way, to find were not cold at all. They were just very, very careful. The face of a man who had learned, young, that nothing he loved would be allowed to stay unless he held it very, very still. She said, "Are you asking me?" "No." "Why?" "Because if I asked you tonight and you said yes, you would be saying yes to a letter and not to me, and I would not be able to bear that." She stood up. She walked to the fountain. She put her hand in the cold water. She watched the ripples. She said without turning around, "What if I cannot tell the difference?" "Then you should leave." That stopped her. She turned around. He was still on the bench with her father's letter in his hand, and his face was perfectly calm, and his voice was perfectly even, and she understood that he meant it. She said, "You would let me? I have been letting you. The door has been unlocked since the night you came. And the rumor, the shame, my father. I will write a second letter. I will say I have decided not to choose you. That you were charming and clever and I enjoyed your company, but that the match was not, after all, suitable. The fault will be mine. Your father will be furious, but his fury will not fall on you, because no alpha can be seen to punish a daughter the king has personally and publicly admired. He will keep you. He may not love you the way he should, but he will keep you. You will be safe. Or I can send you up north, away from the reach of any alpha. You would do that. Yes. For me, yes. Why? He stood up. He walked to her. He did not touch her. He stopped just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold garden air. He said, "Because the only thing worse than living without you would be living with a version of you that did not choose to be here. I have spent 7 years surrounded by people who do not choose me. I will not add you to that list. I would rather lose you free than keep you caged." The fountain ran. A bird called. Somewhere a bell rang. Selene said, "I need to think. Take all the time you need. I need to leave to do it." Something flickered across his face. It was very small. It was almost too small to see. But she saw it. She had been studying him for 7 days. She knew his face better than she had known any face in her life, except perhaps her father's, and that was a face she was no longer sure she knew at all. She saw the flicker, and she saw him put it away, and he said, "Of course. I will need a horse, and a guard perhaps 2, only as far as the border of your land. After that I go alone. I will go to my mother's sister, in the north. She will take me in. She has no love for my father. She has been writing to me since I was 12, telling me I had a place if I ever needed one. I never told you that. I never told anyone, but I have a place." "You have always had a place," he said. "I am glad to know there is one waiting. You will not stop me. No. You will not send for me. No. You will not write." There he hesitated. He said, "I would like to write. Once. Only once. Only to know you arrived. After that, only if you write first. She thought about that. Then she said, once. I will allow once. Thank you. She walked past him toward the palace, and as she passed him, she stopped. She did not look at him. She said to the air, I would like to say before I go that the man I described in your carriage was not the man you are. I know, and I am sorry. You should not be. He is the man the kingdom requires me to seem to be. You only described what you were given. The fault is not yours. Still. She walked on. She did not turn around. She did not need to. She could feel him behind her, watching her go. She had felt him watching her go for 7 days, and the watching had never been heavy. It had been the kind of watching that, she thought now, she might miss. She left the next morning. There were no ceremonies. There was no farewell in front of the court. He had been clever even in this. He had let it be known quietly that the lady from the Crescent Pack had concluded her visit and was traveling north for her health, and the court had nodded, because the court did what he wanted, and no one would speak of it for a season at least. He came down to the courtyard himself. He helped her into the saddle. His hand was warm. He had given her a horse from his own stable, a tall gray mare with quiet eyes and a saddle of plain leather, and a cloak of thick wool, dark blue, lined with fur, that did not have a single royal emblem on it because he had thought even of that. She wore his cloak. She did not own a cloak as good. She would not refuse it. He stood beside the horse with his hand on the bridle, and he looked up at her. And he said, very quietly, only to her, Be safe. Be safe, Selene. It was the second time she had used his name. It was also by extension the last time. He closed his eyes for one heartbeat as if storing it, and then he stepped back and he raised his hand and the gates opened, and she rode out. The road north was long. She rode for 6 days. The 2 guards he had given her turned back at the border of the royal land as she had asked, and from there she rode alone, with the gray mare and the dark cloak and a small leather purse of coins he had pressed into her hand at the last moment without saying anything about it. She had counted the coins on the second night in an inn. It was enough to live on for a year. She had cried then, for the first time. Not for him, for the carefulness of him, for the way he had thought of every road she might need to travel, and laid coins along all of them, and never once made her feel that she owed him for it. Her aunt's house was a small stone farmhouse on a hill above a green valley. It had goats. It had a kitchen that smelled of bread. It had her mother's sister who looked so much like her mother that Selene cried again the moment she saw her, and her aunt did not ask any questions, just held her and fed her and put her to bed and let her sleep for 2 days straight. On the 3rd day, Selene woke up, and she went out into the garden, and she sat on a low stone wall in the morning sun, and she thought. She thought about her father who had sold her, and who had now, presumably, received the king's second letter, and who was now, presumably, very angry and very far away, and no longer, she realized, frightening to her at all. Her father had been her whole world for 17 years, and the whole world, it turned out, was a small and bitter man who had loved her less than his ambitions. She did not hate him. She had moved beyond hating him. She just did not anymore owe him anything. The owing had ended the night he sent her down that staircase. She thought about the king. She had told herself during the long ride that what she felt for him was relief, that the soft ache under her ribs was only relief at having escaped, that the way her hand kept going to the wool of his cloak was only the cold, that the way she replayed every conversation they had ever had, every evening in the candlelight, every quiet question, every careful smile, was only memory, and memory faded. Memory did not fade. The ache was not relief. The cloak was not just warm. She thought about what he had said. The only thing worse than living without you would be living with a version of you that did not choose to be here. And she thought about her father, who had never in his life asked her if she chose anything. And she thought about the door that had not been locked, and the horse he had given her, and the coins along the road, and the second letter that had set her free at the cost of his own face in the kingdom, because a king who did not choose his Luna would be mocked, would be questioned, would have to start the whole humiliating ball process again, with another round of fathers and another round of daughters, and he had agreed to that, willingly, so that her father would not punish her. She thought for the first time about what he had given up so that she could choose. She thought then about what choosing was. Running was not choosing. She had always known that, somewhere underneath, but she had never let herself look at it directly. Running was reacting. Running was being shaped by the thing you ran from. If she stayed in this farmhouse for the rest of her life because she had been told she was for sale, she would be a girl who had been for sale for the rest of her life. The story would still be his. It would still be her father's. It would still be the Ball's. To live a life that was actually hers, she had to choose something, and she had to choose it not because she was running from something else, but because she wanted it. She wanted him. The realization blossomed inside her chest, very gently, like a cat curling up. It had been there for a long time. She had been, mostly, polite enough not to look at it. She wanted him. Not because she had to, not because her father had told her to, not because the kingdom required a Luna and she was the closest girl to the door. She wanted him because in all the days spent together, in candlelit rooms, in white rose gardens, in unlocked corridors, he had become the first person in her life who had asked her how she was, every day, and listened to the answer. She wanted him because he had let her go. She wanted him because if she went back, no one in the world would be able to say she had been forced. The forcing had ended the moment the door was unlocked. If she went back now, it would be the first thing in her life that was entirely, only hers. She wrote a letter. She gave it to her aunt. Her aunt read it. Her aunt looked at her over the top of it, with eyes very much like her mother's eyes, and she said, "Are you sure, child?" "Yes. You only just got here." "I know. You can stay, you know that. You can stay forever." "I know. And that is why I can leave." Her aunt smiled then, a slow, knowing, faintly sad smile. She said, "Your mother said something like that to me once, before she married your father. She said, I am only going because I know I can come back. It was not in the end true for her. I hope it is true for you." Selene took her aunt's hand. She said, "If it is not, I will come back, and you will know." "Yes," her aunt said, "I will know." They sent the letter ahead. Selene rode south the next morning. The letter was, of course, his one letter, the one he had asked permission to send. He had not sent it. Selene knew, before she even arrived, that he had not sent it. She knew because she had been listening, in every village she rode through, for any rumor of the king, and every rumor was the same. He was working, he was in council, he was dispatching judges to the borders, he was doing his job. He was not, the rumors said, courting. He was not arranging another ball. He was, in fact, said to have postponed the matter of the Luna by royal decree until the spring, on the grounds that the matter required, he had said, more thought. More thought. Selene smiled into her horse's mane. She came to the royal palace at sunset on the 14th day after she had left it. She wore his cloak. She wore the simple gray wool dress he had given her, washed and mended now, because she had no wish to arrive in finery. She rode the gray mare. She came alone. The guards at the gate did not at first recognize her. Then the captain of the gate did, and his eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to call out to a runner, and Selene said very calmly, "No, no announcements. I will go in alone. Do not tell him." The captain hesitated. Then he bowed, very low, and he said, "My lady." She had not been called my lady the last time she had ridden out. She had been called a guest. The court, it seemed, had begun to draw its own conclusions. She walked up through the palace, in her gray dress and her dark cloak, with her boots ringing on the stone. Servants saw her. Servants stopped. Servants whispered. She did not stop walking. She had done a great deal of walking in this palace. She knew the corridors. She knew which one led to the small breakfast room, and she knew which one led to the gardens, and she knew which one led to the council chamber where, at this hour, on a working day, the king would still be. She went to the council chamber. She did not knock. The two guards at the door, recognizing her, looked at each other and looked at her, and made a quick decision and stepped aside, and she put her hand on the door, and she opened it, and she walked in. Inside the chamber were a long table, and 10 old men in dark robes, and at the head of the table, sitting in a high carved chair, with one hand resting on a stack of papers and the other hand pressed against his mouth in the way a man does when he is very tired and pretending to listen, was Callan, the Alpha King. He looked up when the door opened. He did not at first register what he was seeing. He had not, she thought, slept much. There were shadows under his eyes that had not been there when she left. His sleeves were rolled up. His hair was a little longer than it had been. He looked at the doorway, and he saw her, and for a long moment he did not move at all, as if his body had decided to stop doing the work of being a body and was waiting for further instructions. The 10 old men turned, slowly, like a row of owls. Selene walked into the room. She walked the length of the long table. She stopped beside the high carved chair. She looked down at him. He looked up at her. The whole room held its breath. She said very quietly, only to him, "I have come back." He said very quietly, only to her, "I see." "You did not write. I was going to write tomorrow." "Liar." "Yes." The faintest, most exhausted smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. The eldest of the old men, a long-bearded creature she vaguely remembered from a hallway, cleared his throat and said, "My king, perhaps we should resume this council at another." "Yes," Callan said, without looking away from her. "Tomorrow. All of you. Out." The old men got up. The old men gathered their papers. The old men filed out, in their robes with their eyes politely lowered in their ears, she was certain, fully open. The door closed behind the last of them. They were alone. Selene took a breath. She had practiced this on the road. She had practiced it in inns and in fields and in the kitchen of her aunt's farmhouse. She had practiced it for 14 days. Now she opened her mouth to say it, and every word she had practiced went out of her head, and what came out was simpler and smaller and truer. She said, "I want to be here. Not because I have to be. Not because my father wants me to be. Not because the kingdom needs a Luna. I want to be here because of you. I want to be here because in 7 days, you became the first person in my life who asked me how I was. I want to be here because you let me go. I want to be here because if I had not left, I would never have known that I would come back. And I have come back." He stood up. He stood up slowly, as if he did not entirely trust his legs. He said, "Selene, I am not finished. I am sorry, continue. I want it to be your Luna, I do. But I want to be it the way I want to be anything, by choice, with the door unlocked. I will marry you. I will stand beside you. I will give this kingdom an heir when we are ready, when we have decided together. But I will not be your possession, not yours, not my father's, not any man's. If you want me, you have me, as an equal, as your match, or you do not have me at all." "Yes," he said. "Yes, all of it. All of it, yes. You are agreeing very fast. I have been thinking about it for 14 days. Have you slept at all?" "No." "You look terrible." "Yes." "Good." He laughed. It was the laugh she remembered, the surprised one, the one that did not seem to know it was allowed. He stepped out from behind the chair. He came to her. He stopped a hand's breadth in front of her, and he did not touch her. He said, very seriously, "May I?" The asking did something to her chest that she did not know what to do with. She nodded. He put his hand against the side of her face. Just that. Just his hand against her cheek, in a council chamber smelling of paper and old smoke, with the late sun coming through the high windows. She closed her eyes. She turned her face into the warmth of his palm. She had not known, until that moment, how much of her had been cold for the entire ride home. He said, "You have leaves in your hair. Again, again, it is a habit. I am beginning to expect it." She opened her eyes. He was very close. His iron-cold eyes were not cold at all. They had only ever been waiting. She said, "Callan, yes, kiss me, please." He did. It was not the kiss of an Alpha King. It was not the kiss of the worst man in the kingdom. It was not the kiss of a wolf or a crown or a war. It was the kiss of a tired man who had been alone for a very long time. given slowly and carefully and with both hands to a woman who had ridden 14 days to give him hers. When it was over, she rested her forehead against his. She said, "I am still going to argue with you about almost everything. I am counting on it. And I am not going to wear pearls." Agreed. And there will be no balls, no staircases, no lines of girls ever, for our daughters or anyone else's. I am very, very glad you said that. And one more thing. Yes. Lock the door. He paused. He drew back just enough to look at her. He said, "The door of this chamber?" "The door of this chamber, yes. Tonight. Only tonight. After tonight, we go back to no locked doors, ever between you and me for the rest of our lives, yes?" "Yes." He went to the door. He turned the heavy key. He came back. He took her hand. He held it as if it were a small, fragile, important thing that had wandered into his life on a forest road in a torn silver dress and had, somehow, against every law of every kingdom, decided to stay. Outside, the sun was setting over the kingdom. Somewhere, in a hall in the Crescent estate, a small, bitter man was pacing and would, by morning, learn that his daughter had married the king without his permission and without his arrangement and without his name on a single document. And he would understand, at last, that he had lost her, and that he had lost her not because she had run, but because she had chosen, and there was no bargain in any kingdom that could undo a choice. Somewhere, in a stone farmhouse on a green hill in the north, an aunt was lighting a candle in her window and smiling at it. Somewhere, in a forest road, a carriage was being washed of old blood from a velvet seat, and the driver was telling the story to anyone who would listen, of the night a barefoot girl in a torn silver dress had thrown open his door and ordered the king of all the wolves to drive. And inside a council chamber with a locked door and a setting sun, and two people who had finally, after a great deal of running and a great deal of waiting, stopped doing both. An alpha king and the daughter of an alpha learned that the opposite of a cage is not an open door. The opposite of a cage is a door you keep walking back through every day of your own free will, because on the other side of it, there is someone who would have let you go. And that, in the end, is the only kind of love that ever lasts. Epilogue. The wedding was not what the kingdom expected. The kingdom expected silver and pearls, and a long staircase and a line of girls and a king walking down to point. The kingdom got, instead, a small garden in the middle of spring, a pair of vows spoken at sunset, and a bride in a plain white dress without a single jewel in her hair. There were no trumpets, no procession, only the two of them, under a tree heavy with white blossom, and a sky going slowly pink at the edges. She wore his cloak around her shoulders. The dark blue one, the one with no royal emblem on it. He had asked her that morning if she wanted a finer one. She had said no. She had said, "This one was the first thing you ever gave me without expecting anything in return, and I will not stand beside you in anything else." He had only kissed the top of her head. They married each other that day as a man and a woman, not as a king and a Luna. Her father did not come. He had been invited. The invitation had been written by Selene's own hand, on plain paper, and it had said only, "You are welcome if you can be a father today." He had written back a long letter full of grievances and conditions, and at the bottom of it, a list of debts he expected the crown to settle as a wedding gift. Selene had read it once. She had folded it, she had put it in the fire, and she had said very quietly, "I do not have a father today. I will tell you one day if I have one again." Kaelin had taken her hand and not pressed her. She did not speak of Ronan of the Crescent Pack for 3 years. Not once. Kaelin kept his letters in a small wooden box on a shelf in his study, in case the day ever came when she wanted to read them. There were many. She did not ask. They ruled together. The court had assumed, as courts do, that the Luna would sit prettily in a window and embroider. The Luna sat instead at the council table. At his right hand. She read every paper he read. She argued with him often in front of the old men in dark robes, and the old men in dark robes, who had spent 30 years agreeing with everything he said because they were afraid of him, slowly learned to argue back. Because if a girl from the Crescent Pack could disagree with the Alpha King and live, then perhaps they could too. The kingdom became a louder place, and a kinder one. The harvests came in heavier. The roads grew safer. He slept now, not every night, not all the way through. But he slept with her hand in his, in a room that was no longer dark, because she had insisted, very early, that there be a small lamp left burning by the window, always. He had argued about it once. He had said, "I am the Alpha King, I do not need a child's lamp." She had said, "You are also a man who heard his brother die in the next room, and you are allowed to have a lamp." He had not argued again. The first child came in the second autumn, a girl, dark-haired like him with her mother's storm-gray eyes. They named her Ada, after Selene's mother. Kalen, who had not held a baby since he was a baby himself, sat on the edge of the bed for an hour with a small bundle in his arms and did not speak, because he was afraid that if he spoke, he would cry. Selene watched him from the pillow, exhausted and luminous, and she said very softly, "It is all right, Kalen. You can." And he did. He cried into his daughter's small dark hair, and Selene cried too, and outside the window very faintly a nightingale was singing. Child came 2 years later. A boy. Selene had said, "Let him be the first of his name. Let him not have to carry anyone's weight." He was called Rowan, and he was loud and bright and impossible, and his father adored him. A third came 3 years after that, another girl, quieter than her sister, the one who would, one day, ask her father why the moon was sometimes red. It was after the third child that Selene took the small wooden box down from the shelf. She sat on the floor of his study in the afternoon light, and she read every letter her father had sent her in 6 years. The early ones were furious. The middle ones were bargaining. The last one, dated 3 months earlier, said only, "I am old. I have been a poor father. I do not ask you to forgive me. I ask only that, when I die, you let your children know my name." Kalen found her there at sunset. He did not ask. He sat down beside her on the dusty boards in his good coat, and he waited. She leaned her head on his shoulder. She said, "I think I would like to write him. Then write him. He does not deserve it. No, but you do." The letter was short. It said, "You were not the father I needed. You may, if you can, be a grandfather to my children. You will come to my house, not yours. You will not speak to me of debts or land or alliances ever again." I am not asking. I am telling. He came. He was by then a small gray man with a slight stoop, and the fire had gone out of him somewhere along the way. When Ada, who was 6 and afraid of nobody, walked up to him in the courtyard and asked him who he was, the old man knelt down in the gravel and said, "I am someone who is very lucky to be here." Selene, watching from the steps, felt something she had been carrying for 9 years finally, gently, set itself down. She did not love him again. That door, she had learned, only opened once. But she forgave him, in the small, careful way a grown woman forgives a man who failed her when she was a child. And the forgiving was not for him. It was for her. It was so that she could hold her own children without any old anger leaking out into their hair. When he died, 4 years later, in his sleep, she rode to his grave and stood there alone for an hour, and she rode home to her husband, and her husband held her, and that was the end of that. The kingdom prospered. The borders held. The 3 children grew. Ada became a scholar. Rowan became a swordsman, like his father, but laughed more than his father ever had, because he had been raised in a house where laughing was allowed. The youngest became a healer, and walked the villages with a small leather bag, and was loved everywhere she went. And the Alpha King and his Luna grew old together. Not sadly, slowly, the way a good fire burns down, with the warmth lasting longer than the flame. They walked, every evening, in the white rose garden, where he had once told her she could leave. They sat, every evening, on the same stone bench. They held hands the way people hold hands who have been holding hands for a very long time, without thinking, because the hand is simply where the other hand goes. On the last good evening of his life, many years later, when his hair was all silver and hers was streaked with it, he turned to her on that same bench, and he said, very quietly, "Selene." And she said, "Yes." And he said, "Thank you for coming back." and she said, "Thank you for letting me go." And he closed his eyes, and he smiled, and far above them the lamp in their bedroom window was already lit, because she had never, in all those years, let it go out. They lived, they loved, they ruled well. They raised 3 good children who raised good children of their own. The cage was never built, the door was never locked. And on quiet nights in the northern reaches, even now mothers tell their daughters about the Alpha King and the girl in the torn silver dress, and the carriage on the forest road, and the choice that started everything. And the daughters, listening, learn the only thing the story was ever really trying to teach them. That love, the real kind, the lasting kind, is never something you are caught by. It is something you walk back to, every day, of your own free will, forever. If you like this story, or if this story stayed with you even a little, take a second to like, subscribe, and tell me what part hit you the most in the comments. I'm here reading, replying, and building these stories with you, so your voice actually shapes what comes next.